today. All of that today on Perspective. We have with us John Sitilides, who is a geopolitical analyst, geology advisor, joining us. Thank you for being with us. John, President Trump has announced a new crushing economic operation against Iran. How much of this is rhetoric? Can this level of economic pressure actually force Tehran back to the negotiating table? And then at the same time, are these, those assertions hyperbole that has continuously come from the President of the US? How do you look at it?
First of all, thank you for having me on with your audience this evening. No, I don't believe this is pure rhetoric. I think that the president is deadly serious about trying to impose the greatest economic pain on the military dictatorship that now runs the Iranian government under the auspices of the IRGC. Whether or not this will succeed, only time will tell. I mean, there's no way of knowing yet. The formal sanctions package has not been officially announced. I believe that'll be happening the beginning of next week. And it's also doubtful that some of the most critical trading partners of Iran will comply with the US sanctions or whatever the new framework is going to be. And that, of course, starts with the People's Republic of China. The Chinese Communist Party has made very clear that they don't believe that sanctions is the way to deal with this situation in the Persian Gulf between the US and Iran. They've also ordered their companies in the past to not abide by US sanctions that have nothing to do with Iran, but are caught up largely in the US-China technology competition. So I don't see the Chinese looking to be helpful to the United States in any way, nor do I believe the Russians will be helpful in any significant way. Vladimir Putin feels right now that he has the advantage in the war against Ukraine. And I don't think that there's going to be any serious leverage between Washington and Moscow that can be exerted in that direction to win Russia's favor. And then there are other countries that are also important trading partners of Iran: Pakistan, Turkey, Iraq, South Africa. And the question will be, to what extent will secondary sanctions on those countries' banks and financial institutions credible? And that's all going to be playing out over the next several days, next several weeks, and possibly deep into 2027.
When we look at, you're saying that this could mean sanctions potentially for other countries. First of all, not all countries, like you said, are ready for that kind of economic pressure. But will that translate necessarily into more pressure on Iran? Versus what Iran is saying, that they are resilient, they've had, back-breaking economic pressure over a long time. How do you look at that assertion? How is this pressure going to be new to Iran?
I don't think it's going to be new. First of all, let's talk about the fact that we're really dealing with two Irans here. There are the Iranian people, 92 million people, who are suffering extreme poverty thanks to the pathetic policies of the theocracy until there was a decapitation on February 28th, and now the military dictatorship under the IRGC. And then there's the regime. And the US looks at these as two very distinct entities. Unfortunately, it's the Iranian people that will suffer the most grievously the deeper that these economic sanctions are implemented, because the regime cares little or nothing at all for the well-being of the 92 million citizens of Iran. But if the regime can be denied funds to provide for the IRGC, for terrorist proxies in other countries in the Middle East, to pay the Artesh, the professional army, which some might say may be the salvation for the Iranian people if they decide that they've had enough of the IRGC's rule and decide to wage a civil war against the IRGC. But in terms of your question on the secondary sanctions, it's going to be a very tall order for the administration. And as I mentioned before, I don't believe China and Russia are in any position to abide by a secondary sanctions regime. They will likely order their companies to continue trading with Iran. I don't know to what extent there'll be significant pressure, say, on the respective governments that I mentioned earlier. Turkey, which is a US NATO ally, Pakistan, with whom we share very close military and intelligence capabilities, South Africa, we have sort of weakening relations there, but other countries that are trading with Iran. Now, we see that the UAE has already set what President Trump would consider to be a prime example as to how to break all financial transactions and trade relations with Iran, largely because Iran has imposed very self-destructive policies by attacking the UAE when the UAE was really a clearinghouse for so many of the financial transactions that brought hard currency into the Iranian economy. So again, this will take very, very skillful diplomacy. We see right now that Secretary of State Rubio and Secretary of Treasury Bessent are the two main drivers of Trump's policy towards Iran. And I think also we need to overlay this with the US congressional elections, the midterm elections that'll take place in about 10 weeks here, and the degree to which President Trump is able to move the news media in the US away from the Iran war, keep the economic pressure, but reduce.
Do you think that you mentioned countries that have taken an active part in this diplomatic process? Pakistan is one of them. Do you think that it could extend to those countries who have been working tirelessly towards trying to restore peace between US and Iran, and perhaps are uniquely placed to be able to talk to both sides?
Yes. I believe if the president and Secretary Bessent are to be taken seriously after they formally announce this new escalated sanctions regime next week, then yes, if countries like China and Russia are going to be targeted, then certainly Pakistan will be targeted as well. And it's not a matter of targeting individual countries. If I hear Secretary Bessent correctly, he's telling every country in the world, choose your side. You're either with the United States or you're with Iran. And that's going to include Pakistan, of course.
But do you think that as a geopolitical strategist, do you think that that strategy has worked? Because we are looking at US, we have in the past at least seen a US floundering to find a country or a state that can perhaps sort of mediate or take diplomacy to a kind of sustainable level between US and Iran. If all countries are going to be forced to choose sides, won't US find it hard to find any such country, any such nation then?
I believe that would be correct if the regime in Iran could be trusted to abide by a deal that could be negotiated by Pakistan, by Qatar, by Turkey, by other countries that have attempted to do so over the last 6 months. My own sense is, if I hear President Trump correctly and Secretary Rubio and our Secretary Bessent, I think they've come to the conclusion that this regime in Tehran is utterly trustworthy. Even if they come to the table, they're not expected to abide by any deal, which is why I think if you really hear between the lines, I think there's a sense that regime collapse really is the goal right now, not a return to diplomacy and more sort of deal discussions that simply delay the outcome for the United States. So I don't think diplomacy really is.
So you think that those that believe, in your opinion, that believe that ultimately the only resolution to this conflict lies in diplomacy, have been proved wrong by how you see Washington thinking at this time?
Well, that's a discussion that world leaders can have with the Trump administration. But again, if we hear the president and take him at his word for the last several days, he doesn't believe that anyone in Tehran right now, governing Tehran, is worth talking to. He's said very clearly, discussions are finished. There's now simply going to be economic pressure through this maximum sanctions regime. And the question is going to be really Iran's response. Iran may decide to attack.
But realistically speaking, how pushed is Iran going to be about these countries or these nations being roped in this war? It doesn't seem to have been, we know what happened as far as UAE is concerned. We know how, Iran has sort of roped them in. So in terms of these other countries now, becoming a part of this war, being affected, becoming affectees, do you think Iran really cares?
Well, again, it depends. We'll see how this all plays out over the next several weeks and potentially next several months. Right now, there's a lot of bluster and bravado, but the Iranians have always been very skilled at this kind of propaganda, especially in Western media, exploiting our open democratic procedures here in the United States and in Western Europe. So I think a lot of this is bluster. I think internally, there's a lot of infighting between, say, the parliament speaker, the president. You hear some of their statements just in the last 24 hours that Iran is not going to be able to withstand this kind of economic pressure. But then they're dealing with fanatical ideologues inside the IRGC who are determined to take Iran down to the final man, if possible. So I think this is going to play out inside of Tehran. There's no unanimity at all within the government there. They're infighting. And again, as I said before, whether you have the Artesh that decides that unpaid soldiers are not going to be defending the regime any longer, and whether or not you also have potential insurgencies that are developed inside of Iran over the next several months, again, to bring about a collapse of the regime.
But what about do you think that Washington is at a very real risk of sort of alienating its other allies or countries that it has, uniquely placed relationship with?
Well, the process is not what is most important over here, it's the outcome. President Trump has made very clear, and he has said this over and over again, Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. So whatever process gets us to that outcome is going to be the one that is going to be supported. So it's not a matter of maintaining a diplomatic process. If countries cannot help us attain that outcome, denying Iran nuclear weapons, then their efforts are not really very valuable. That's what it comes down to.
Could, in your opinion, targeting Iranian oil ultimately turn this into, like you were earlier saying, U.S.-Iran economic confrontation, with Iran becoming, another battleground in this strategic competition? And, if it does happen that way, do you think that perhaps Iran will find more countries that sympathize with it? That could be an effect also?
No, it's a good question that you ask. I think Iran is becoming increasingly isolated. There's not a lot of sympathy for it, but there also are many countries that are protecting their own interests. And of course, that's where they're trying to shield themselves against these pending US sanctions. Countries want to do business with Iran because they're neighbors of Iran, whether it's Turkey, whether it's Pakistan, even some of the Gulf countries that have been attacked over the last 6 months want to do business with Iran. But it has to be a normal government. And the problem is that we don't have a normal government in Iran. The oil issue is one part of the equation, also liquefied natural gas. But I think much of what the world has missed out on is also the disruption to the shipment of petrochemicals, fertilizers, essential chemicals like helium that have also been disrupted because Iran is trying to maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz and to impose tolls and fees that are an outright violation of international law and international legal frameworks. So unfortunately, I think we are going to see continued tensions in the region. This likely will endure through the end of this year and probably well into the spring of 2027.
Thank you so much for joining us, John. Thank you for your very valuable input. I'm going to be moving on to